Hi everyone, today's webinar will run approximately for 1 hour and it is being recorded. We'll be sending out an email with link to the recording and slides within the next few days. So welcome to the Ask an Expert webinar. We want to answer your questions. So today we'll start with questions that were submitted ahead of time, and we would like the second half to be to answer your questions live. So please submit your questions using the question box at any time. We also want to hear from you. So if you have anything to share, any experiences or comments, you can also pop those in the questions box and we will be reading through them during the webinar. If you would now go ahead and say hi to us, let us know where you're joining from and give us a little information about you, your job role and industry you work in, so we can get a sense of who has joined us this morning. So thank you so much everyone for participating, and now I will go ahead and hand it over to our expert for today, co-author of the TKI Team Report and conflict management expert, Gail.
Thanks, Jen. Hey, Jen, are people putting their comments in the box now, the chat box, where they're coming from, etc.?
Yes, we do see it. We see Anne from Atlanta, Robert from Richmond, Virginia. Thanks everyone so much for joining. We have a couple of psychologists. We have a consultant.
Okay, anything else?
We have people from Cleveland, a few people from Virginia, some from San Diego.
Great.
Anne says she teaches leadership to farmers and ranchers in Florida, and she's used the TKI with them. It's very helpful because many of them have family businesses, which have plenty of conflict.
So it looks like we've got people from all over the country, so we're in multiple time zones. That's great. And I did look at the list of people who registered, and I was just really impressed with the wide variety. People, like you say, where they're coming from demographically, but also what their positions are, what kinds of organizations they're coming from. So I'm super excited to share kind of what I've learned over the last many years with everyone. So I'm going to go ahead, and I know I get to get trigger happy on the slide sometimes. So hopefully I can keep that under control. So just a little bit about my background so that I can share with people kind of where I'm coming from today. I taught at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California for more than 30 years. I would classify my style as active learning. I just can't learn enough. So this job has been perfect for me. Not only do I teach in the MBA program, I do a lot of executive education, so a lot of work with senior leaders, but about half of my job is going out in the field and learning what kind of issues that the managers and leaders have. And those usually spur my interest in what my research is going to be. And then I'm able to share that research kind of going forward. And my areas, as you can see, is primarily communication, conflict management, collaboration, teams work. And just as a quick example of the kind of work I do, I'm actually leaving tomorrow to go to East Africa. And I've been did work with friends, colleagues, when 9/11 happened around building collaborative capacity, which is kind of a part of conflict management. And we developed a conceptual model, we developed a assessment tool, and we have been using that with all kinds of organizations all over the world. So we took it internationally when we spent back and forth over 3 years in Sarajevo, looking at mine action and landmines and working with people within the country on how best to remove those mines. And the work I'm doing next week will be with 5 different African nations, East African nations, working on national security issues. And so we expanded the collaboration model that we have, working across countries and in a whole security region. So it's always interesting for me to take it to other countries, to other topics, and keep building our model. So anyway, that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited and where my passion is. So constantly out there learning, then coming back and writing and doing things like that. So as Jen said, what I'm really hoping is people will throw things in the chat box. And for some reason, Jen, I'm not seeing stuff in the chat box. I'm going to count on you to kind of read to me so that I can see what people are saying. And then, of course, afterwards, I'll get to see everything. So the more ideas, just, you know, your thinking, your curiosities, your anything you have you want to put in the chat box, ideas you have, I'd love to hear from you. So moving forward. I wanted to do a quick poll and just kind of get a sense of how many of you have used the TKI. Is it predominantly with individuals? Do you do it with individuals and teams? You don't use it very frequently, or you've never used it. So that will just help me kind of see what the use of it is. And Jen, maybe you can guide them in how to answer that and what you're going to do to reveal the results.
So, hey Gail, it's Caitlin. Hi everyone. I finally got into the webinar. I was having some technical difficulties joining. So I am a marketing manager here at the Myers-Briggs company, so I will be helping with the rest of the webinar. Jen saved me there for a few minutes. So yes, I know, right? It happens. So the poll is open. You should be able to see all of those options. So go ahead and vote. We'll leave this open for a few more seconds just to get a little bit more responses, and then I'll go ahead and share the results with everyone on your screen so you'll be able to see the makeup of the room. We'll just take out. All right, so I'll go ahead and close it now. And I know some people did put in the chat as well what they have. So some people use with individuals and teams frequently in the chat, as well as these results on the screen right here. So about 4% is with individuals, 31% use the TKI with individuals and teams, 29% use the TKI infrequently, and about 36% have never used the TKI.
Great. Yeah, I was kind of expecting that, which is good because we had a broader audience this time, so I would assume there are people who haven't used it yet. So as you can see, we got a wide range of people. I'm sure we have some people who are very experienced using the instrument, and we have others who have not used it at all. So I'm going to try to address as many of those needs as I possibly can, and providing information that will be useful to everyone. This Ask an Expert, as Jen said earlier, we took a bunch of questions that we've gotten from previous webinars, all different kinds of things. So I am going to provide information about the question. It won't be a deep dive on things. Truthfully, each one of these questions I've often given a whole, 2-3 hour seminar on. So I'm going to point you a lot to some resources so you'll have things to follow as we go. Okay. So another thing I'd like to have you all do to participate is I want you to think about a team, and it can either be a team that you're working on yourself, and it can be from the past, it can be from currently that you're a member of, maybe you're the leader, maybe you're not, or maybe you're working with a team in an organization. So you could be the consultant, the facilitator, or whatever. So with that team in mind, if you could write in the chat box a conflict that the team is or was dealing with. And I provided an example of one conflict with a team that two teams actually, I was working with over the weekend. And it's a small municipality, and the board and the managers disagree on an employee compensation scheme. So they're working through that conflict or differences they have around that issue. So if you could throw in the chat box, examples of conflict with teams either you're on, make it as anonymous as you want, is fine. But I just wanted to get everybody kind of thinking about that and see what kind of conflicts you've been dealing with. And Caitlin, you're going to have to read to me. For some reason, my chat's not coming through.
Yeah, no problem. So we've got a couple coming in, conflict over budget cuts across a large government entity.
Yep.
For a corporation, a DEI team is in conflict about pacing and scope. There's another one that's a distribution of workload. The team is working through a lot of projects with multiple tasks. And then 2 divisions need to work together. One executive is willing and open. The other is resistant to change and doesn't want to work together. HR partners with industry experience, changing processes for academic personnel, but not understanding the need for trainee data. Conflict over product development priorities. Cliquey behavior on teams or team members not wanting to share information. I'm working with a team that doesn't appreciate their leader's avoidance of conflict. However, when she tries to deal with conflict head on, they don't appreciate that either. It's definitely varied.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for that. These are very typical issues that I hear all the time. I just did a talk last week, Silicon Valley consultants up there. And even though we were really focused on high tech, I tell you, 99% of the list was the same things I saw in the military and other places where I work. So very common kinds of issues, but there'll be a twist on it depending on the particular organization. So thank you for that. That's very helpful. Okay, so today what I'm going to try to do is, in the amount of time that we have, as Jen said and Caitlin, I'm going to go probably about 30 minutes or so. I'm going to try to watch maybe less than that, actually, 25 minutes or so, and get through as many of these questions as I can. We do want to hear from you. So as we're going along, if you have questions, and then I'm going to stop at some point and try to get some more questions from you, see what you're interested in. And if I don't get through all these questions, Caitlin will put together something that we will get you the information. And also, as we mentioned before, you'll get all the slides, so that we'll have a lot of good resources for you. So just quickly going through the list. Question we constantly get, and many organizations, right, if you're going to do some kind of training or intervention, they want to know, how's this going to improve performance? So that's the first question. The second one are, what are some of the best approaches for building conflict management skills for a team? Today I'm going to focus mostly on teams just to try to narrow the scope, but obviously individuals are part of teams, so there will be some things around individuals as well as just teams in general. What's the best use of the TKI interpretive report and the team report? I'm going to just touch on that briefly, so especially those of you who may not be familiar with it. This question I get all the time is, are conflict handling skills different for remote, hybrid, and face-to-face teams? So I'm going to talk about that for a moment. I get this one a lot. Can I change my conflict handling preferences? And then what's new about conflict in teams? I'm going to try to just hit the wave tops on that. I just gave a presentation at an academic conference on that. And I've got lots of interesting things I've been learning as I get into the literature. What kind of generational differences are there in conflict handling skills? How can I have conflict with my boss? That topic was so popular, I actually developed a whole module for Homeland Security, Fire, Police, and many other organizations, and that has gone over really well. I get a question often about bullying, and then obviously we're going to try to get more questions and insights from you. So again, if you want to throw anything in the chat box, and Caitlin, just interrupt me whenever you want, just let me know what's going on there. Okay, is how can conflict improve team performance? So one thing I really like about conflict in teams, I'm co-author with Ralph Kilman and Ken Thomas, who happens to be my husband. I've been working on this team report for a long time that was just released last quarter, and the end of last year. And I do a lot of research on team development, particularly in the Navy. I've developed instruments and things. So the overlap of the team data, or team literature, and research I've done and conflict management is just really, really interesting to me. So as many of you might, some of you may be familiar with this book called The Remote Work Revolution, Sadal Neely from Harvard. She's got a book that I recommend is good. And she's got a quote from there that I just put here that says, disagreement, I'm going to call that the same as conflict, is key to refining ideas, identifying mistakes, and growing a collective unit. And so, and I would add to that just surfacing ideas, not even refining ideas, but surfacing different ideas, which is conflict. And I'll talk more about the definition in a minute, but that is key. Again, I've done a lot of research around high-performing teams, and conflict is essential for high-performing teams. So they two go very, very closely together. Okay, and you know, the team research is pretty sophisticated now with all the research methods that are out there. There is a science of team development. Granted, there's an art, and human beings are human beings, so it's not all simple. But one of the books I really like is relatively new, 2021, What Makes Teams Work: The 7 Drivers of Team Effectiveness. And that's Scott Tannenbaum and Eduardo Salas. And they have both done research on teams for a long time. This is a compilation of meta-analyses of thousands of teams that they looked at and what makes a high-performing team. So I chose 5 that are kind of top for them is high-performing teams that manage conflict well, are better at servicing input from diverse perspectives. And again, that's a lot of what organizations are trying to do right now. Able to analyze alternative solutions more effectively, better at making decisions. Along with that goes morale and member retention, and more satisfied with their team experience. So there are data from multiple studies that highlight these points on the importance of well-managed conflict for high-performing teams. So again, this is another place I'm going to point to a resource. If you want to get more information about that, that's a great place to go look and get off. Those of you who love to throw out numbers and data, it's all there. So that's just a great resource. Okay, so next I want to talk about just like what is it that are the best approaches for improving conflict management skills for teams. Again, this comes from my own research, from being deeply in the literature, and my skills and experience working with other teams at all levels and organizations. And this is kind of the overview. And the number one thing I found, and those of you who are doing work in this area, I'm sure probably run into this problem all the time, is the importance of being clear on what conflict is and it's not. So the definition, and I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. Next is becoming self-aware of your conflict handling preferences and those of your teammates. So are you low and high on assertiveness or cooperativeness? I'm going to show you a model about that in just a minute. What might be driving team members' conflict handling behaviors? Is it personality traits, the role on the team, other team players' roles? The TKI is situational. It's not a personality instrument. So a lot depends on the situation and what's going on how people might react. So, and I'll talk more about that in a minute too. Be able to discuss with your teammates the modes that might be helpful at this particular time for this task. And having those conversations, I know, again, from my research and work I've been doing, is those discussions with team members about how the team is working together is top of the list on high-performing teams. Then practice on improving your skills on those 5 modes. Once you know where your strengths and your weaknesses are, how can you build a stronger repertoire of all of them so you have them all to use? You know, they're not good or bad. There's certain ones that are better at certain times. And really the trick is to become conscious. So build a literacy around it, become conscious of it, and so that you know which ones you're picking, how you're relating to other people, so that you can make adjustments and make the adaptations. And one of the things that my colleague Chip Wood and I do a whole lot of work together on team building is getting feedback from others to improve the team's conflict management skills. So we help teams develop a psychologically safe space where they can give and receive feedback each other to really improve those skills. And obviously not everybody's there at the beginning, so sometimes, oftentimes we're called in for teams that are struggling, and so we kind of have to stop for a moment and try to get everyone on a good page to move forward. So kind of delving in just a little bit on some of this is defining conflict. So this is from my husband's early work. Ralph joined him soon after that. Conflict occurs when people's concerns or the things they care about appear to be incompatible. So it's really about differences in opinions, perceptions. And so conflict itself, just in and of itself, is just a difference. It's neutral. It's not good or bad. It's the way we handle it that can either be destructive or constructive. So that's the part that is where it's important, is the management of the conflict. So oftentimes, and I'm sure many of you who do this kind of work, people see conflict as negative, that it's fighting, that it's something not good. And so the tendency then is to avoid. And that's not where, as I mentioned earlier with Sadal's comment, that's not where we're going to gain the performance, is if we see conflict as bad. It's really just differences, and we actually want to stoke those differences at particular times within the team development. So I'll talk about that in a minute too. So really getting clear on the definition and getting rid of that conflict is bad, let's avoid it. That is just, number one, foundational. The next thing, and Caitlin, do I have any comments or anything?
Yes, actually, somebody would like you to speak more about number 4 on that particular list, which I think you're getting to.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So thank you. Good. I just want to make sure everybody's out there and alive. Okay, good. So another really good way to, again, it depends on how much time and what your goal is and everything, but one of the things I talk a lot about are the 3 types of conflict. Again, I've listed a reference there. There are other types of conflict, but these are the 3 that are talked about the most in the literature now. So process conflict, relationship conflict, and task conflict. And I've given some examples of process conflict. And again, as I heard Caitlin saying the conflicts that you mentioned, we could probably bucket those into one or more of these different types of conflict. So process conflict and relationship conflict we want to minimize, because those generally are not helpful for high-performing teams. But the third one, task conflict, yes, there is a kind of a sweet spot of not too little, not too much, task conflict that's around the substantive or content issues. And so those are the kinds of things that we really want to try to develop processes, develop structures around actually increasing task conflict in a positive, constructive way. So, and there are many ways in which we can reduce process and relationship conflict. In the references, I have an article that I really like a lot that I use as a reference that has to do with Too Hot to Handle, it's called, and it's Amy Edmondson and her partner Smith, and that article is really good. It's a little dense, but it's also very practitioner oriented, so you'll get reference to that at the end of the presentation here. And then process conflict I'll talk a little bit about, and a little bit more on task conflict. Okay, so this is the basic model for those of you in particular who are not familiar with the TKI or just conflict in general. This one was developed by Ken and Ralph, and it has been replicated in various forms from other academics. So it's pretty tried and true. It's been around for a long time. And basically, without going into any detail, now for these, again, there are ways that you can get more information on this. Caitlin's going to give you information in a follow email on 3 different webinars that Ken and Ralph and I did the first one, I did the second 2, where we go into a lot more detail on this model. So just for today, on this axis, you've got assertiveness. On this axis, you've got cooperativeness. So the 5 modes all pretty easily. If you're uncooperative and assertive, that's the competing mode. If you are unassertive and uncooperative, that's avoiding. Accommodating is cooperative and unassertive. Compromising is what we call a split down the middle. And collaborative is what some would call the win-win. So how can we be assertive, expressing our own needs, but also cooperative, looking at what the other people need on the team? Or in my case, I'm going to be working with representatives from 5 different nations and working on collaboration. So, and this one I would say is the most difficult, is why we often see people not using that one as frequently as you might. But in the high performing research, we know that for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but collaboration is one of the most important skill sets to have. So I always have people, wherever they are in their assessment of their modes and their preferences, to build those collaboration skills, because those will help you, throughout your career and all over the organization, on change, on many other things you all mentioned earlier. So, but there are a time and a place for all 5 modes. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just kind of giving some basics of the concepts. There is a time to compete, there is a time to collaborate, to compromise, to avoid, and to accommodate. So one of the important things of building literacy with the team is to also add the layer of when do we use each one of these. So again, as I said, all 5 modes are important. It's knowing when to use each one of those. So wherever your strengths and weaknesses are, you want to build your competence around these so that you're able to use it effectively wherever you are. So again, these we've got lots of other resources that you can look at to go more deeply into that. And the one other thing I threw in here, because I know some of you have seen this before, and I think it's really helpful, is Myers-Briggs just did a follow-up research study on conflict management and compared it to a study that was similar in 2008. And in that report, and Caitlin's going to send you the reference for that too, if you don't already have it, are things like what causes conflict, how well people believe they manage conflict. So lots and lots of data that were collected through Myers-Briggs that talk a lot of detail about conflict. And again, for those, just for background knowledge is really good, or if you want to use it for training or coaching, that's also a helpful resource. Okay, and then what's the best use of the TKI Interpretive Report and the TKI Team Report? So not really to talk about the team report and the individual report, but to this part here is important because it will share with you how to do an assessment, okay? So this is in the team report and in the individual report, people who fill out, they get, it's an A/B for 30 questions looking at those 5 different modes. And so they're picking which one is their preference based on a time that they're involved in conflict. And so this is what their profile might look like. So in this particular case, this person was high on avoiding, next high on accommodating, then competing, collaborating, and compromising. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot on the scoring. There are sample reports and more information on the website that you can find, but this gives you an idea of a particular person's preferences. So, and anything 75, higher than 75 percentile is considered high. Anything 25 percentile lower is considered low. And so you kind of get a sense of the model is built around overuse and underuse of those particular modes. So in this one we see, as I said earlier, it's fairly low on collaborating. So again, I'd need to know more about the person and the team, but probably a good idea would be for that person definitely to learn more collaboration and compromising skills. Okay, and then for the team report that just came out, in addition to each person from the report getting this about their own conflict handling preferences, they also get, everyone who gets the report gets to see what it looks like for the whole team. So in this particular case, it's a profile of 7, team size of 7, and 57% of those people fell in the overuse of accommodating. and 57% of the team fell in the overuse of avoiding. So you start to get a profile of how this team is operating. So that is useful, and just, you know, my preference is, maybe I'm thinking you probably already heard this, I'm going to go for data and evidence-based kinds of things. So all of my conversations start with gathering some data, whether it's self-assessments or team assessments or those types of things. And those seem to be, it's a very useful way for me to learn and to share with others and help them develop their team skills, their leadership skills. And then each in the team, TKI team reports and in the individual report, you get not only the profile, but you also get all kinds of information about what it means, and then also recommendations and remedies for how to improve where you have areas of overuse and underuse. So those are just chock full of information too. You can get sample reports on the Myers-Briggs website, so you can see for yourself what an individual one looks like and what a team looks like. I predominantly use the individual when I'm teaching a class. So I use it's classes of managers, or I obviously use the team if the team is, if I'm, you know, trying to do team development. So each one of them has particular uses. Okay, anything, Caitlin, I need to know?
We did get one question, but it was on, I think, around the 3 types of conflicts that teams encounter.
Okay.
So the question was, what percentage of the time do you see each of those 3 types?
Oh, that's a good question. So I'll just interject that real quickly here. So I see all 3, and what I usually find is conflicts don't fall just in one bucket, that they impact each other. So let me give you a quick example. So it might be that I'm working on a task and there becomes interpersonal conflict involved in that too. So, and that might actually spread to the next time when I'm going to be asked to be on a team and I find out a person's going to be there who, for whatever reason, I don't like the way we interacted on that last team, and it actually will interfere with my ability to do task conflict, perhaps. So the 3 are related, and I see all 3 of those frequently. So I don't think, I think it would be team by team on whether they, and I'll talk about in a minute of how it is you can mitigate process and interpersonal conflict so that you don't have as many of those issues. Okay, how are conflict skills different for remote, hybrid, and face-to-face teams? This one I covered in the 3rd webinar, and I'm going to talk just a minute about this, but if you'd like a lot more information about this, there's spent quite a bit more time on this and that. And what I'm finding is if you look across teams, those of you who do team development, the research shows, and again, these are broad buckets, but a beginning, a middle, and an end of the project life cycle. And I'm actually moving away from thinking about the traditional storming, forming, norming, performing kind of typology, because teams are so ubiquitous in organizations. People are moving in and out of teams. Before I retired from Naval Postgraduate School and started my self-employment, I counted I was on 15 different teams. And some are short-lived, some are span a long time. People are moving in and out all the time. And so it's really more, and that's why I think building conflict management skills is so important, because not just within that team, but just across an organization to be able to do that as you come and go on different teams, or just also the interpersonal nature. So, and there are, again, clear data that show different types of conflict that start at the beginning of a team or at the project, and different things that come up in the middle, and different things that come up towards the end. So lots and lots of research around that, science, all kinds of science around that. And so being aware of those types of things and knowing how to mitigate some of that is super helpful. So let me just give you an example here. and it ties, I think, to the question we got earlier, is to mitigate process and relationship conflict at the beginning. Is when a team first starts out, being able to establish team norms. So how are we going to work together? And my colleague Chip and I do this all the time. We sit down and elicit from all the people in the group, how is it that you want to work together? And they develop standards or norms around how they're going to work together. And pretty much all the time, the one that comes up is we want to be respectful towards each other. And then we always say, what does that mean? What does that look like? Because we're looking for behaviors. Then oftentimes the team will actually write those down. They might post them, they refer to them frequently. And then the idea is that you would enforce those norms throughout the project lifecycle. And if there are places where people are struggling or maybe they've gone off the rails a little bit, then maybe it's time to do a stop in the process and do some readjustment around that. Because those process issues will often, spill into interpersonal issues. So again, they're related to each other. And then providing some skills on how to do the task conflict, how to provide structure so that people feel, one is creating a psychologically safe environment so that everybody feels comfortable to share. For those Myers-Briggs practitioners, knowing introverts are often going to jump in and say something right away, how can you structure it so that everybody gets the opportunity to have a voice? Because being able to voice those differences, those are also related to engagement. So all of these things fit together. So, kind of looking across the whole project lifestyle and understanding how conflict unfolds. And again, there's a lot more research around that that is, I think, really interesting that we need to be paying attention to. Same thing, face-to-face, hybrid, and fully remote. There is a lot of research around those three types of teams, and that they are not the same. For instance, I just mentioned psychological safety. It's different, in how you establish that, whether it's a hybrid, fully remote, or face-to-face team. And that trust and psychological safety is going to be key to high performance. So again, relying on the literature on how do we look at conflict across the project lifestyle, and then how do we make adjustments based on if it's face-to-face, hybrid, or fully remote. So again, I'm going to give you lots of resources. You can go to that third webinar that I did a few months ago, and I talk more about this, but that's just a good way to kind of tease this out and figure out what's the best strategies. Here's just an example. Again, I won't go through all this in detail, but for process, relationship, and task conflict, these are virtual work considerations. And again, this comes from the research, multiple sources, as my own research, and from my practice. So all of these are also helpful in being able to reduce process, reduce relationship, and be able to provide structure for task conflict at particular times throughout the project, okay, in a virtual environment. Okay, is it possible to change? I'm going to check my time here. Ooh, I'm going to do this one last one. I'm going to jump out to more questions, and then we'll see if we have time for others. This one I have really fun with. I've had a lot of fun with. So people ask, so they'll get a profile and they'll go, wow, I'm really worried. I'm really high on avoiding and accommodating. And truthfully, I totally agree with that. I know that's an issue for me. How can you help me? Can I change my conflict handling preferences? So one of the tools that I've been using for the last couple of years that seems really helpful. So I have on the screen, there are 4 different kind of samples of people's profiles. Now, not always, but oftentimes people will have too high or maybe too low or something. So these are just kind of samples. And you'll notice that the green is high, the red is underuse. Green is considered overuse based on the model. And so if I show them what this model, if this is their model, I'll say, what does this look like? They'll say, oh, I'm high on assertive. Okay, so what does that mean? I'm going to show you a worksheet in a second about what might be driving that, what might be the consequences of that for my teammates, or if I'm the leader for the rest of the team. Where am I low? So in this case, underusing, compromising, and accommodating. This one real quick is high on avoiding and accommodating, so unassertive. This one is uncooperative. And this one here, which is a little bit more difficult one to see, is, and not necessarily green, but still high, is on the diagonal. And part of using the TKI model is learning about the distributive versus the integrative. So collaboration's integrative, this is distributive, which usually means people are often kind of stuck in thinking about things as win-lose. Either I win or I lose, and then vice versa, or we're going to split down the middle. If someone has a pattern like this, oftentimes they don't see the win-win or haven't really even thought about that as a possibility. So it gives us a way to look at kind of their assumptions and their intent, and then start working on some skills to strengthen or careful where they may be overusing things. So this I have found to be a really good learning tool that I'm sharing with you today. This I use in coaching. So after people have completed this, and that's what I just showed you, they put the percentiles in there. And then I ask them to complete this before we have a one-on-one. So I ask them why they think that might be after they've read the report. They get more information, and then we'll have a coaching session. And then what are the disadvantages of their overuse and underuse? And then we talk specifically about skill building and set some goals for leadership development. And so this is another really nice personal development or leadership development tool to help them build on what they learned from the team reports or from the individual report. Okay, I think, let's see. Yeah, so I'm going to stop right there and see what kind of questions we have, because I want to see or insights other people have or really cool things you might be doing in your own practice. So I'd like to hear from some of you before we go any further.
Okay, so a couple of questions that you submitted. So the first question is, for the team report, are team members responding to questions with regard to how the team operates, or is it a sum of individual responses?
Great question. So the way the team report works, and again, this follows research, is each person is completing the TKI assessment just like they do for the individual assessment. So the 30 questions, A/B choices. And so each person sees what their individual is, and then that profile shows you what the compilation of those. Now, in the facilitator's guide for the team report, I do have a team assessment so people can look at how they're viewing how the team's working together. And the idea for that is to look and see how diverse the opinions are about how people think their team is working. And so the more standard deviation or the diversity you have in those answers, those are places you probably need to work, because again, it's all data driven. So it's really helpful. They answer the questions, and then you look at where do people think they're having issues with the team or whatever. And I'll say briefly, because I don't know if I'll get to this, the latest research is really around conflict dynamics is really an individual kind of thing. And it's the interaction between individuals around conflict that is really important. So when you take instruments like this or whatever, and you average, or you have some, this is what the profile of the team is overall as a team, it's really the interactions of various people in the team. So there are both of those in the team report, but both of those are going to be important for understanding individuals' contributions to those dynamics, as well as how are people thinking about how the team's working. Is it working well together or not, and where do they need to do some work on that? So again, I'm always going to go for the data. Okay, another one?
Yeah, so we got a comment that I think is kind of nice for you to hear. Thank you for creating the team facilitator kit. It was very helpful yesterday in customizing the intro email and calling out team name and team members so they focus on the group. So just a nice little comment on the facilitator's guide. So the next one, do we have access to the conflict handling personal development plan?
Oh, Good one. Caitlin, I mentioned that before. So yes, you don't right now, but if you're interested in it, I'm going to have Caitlin share that. Having been a professor for so many years, I'm really in the share mode. So I'm happy to share the tools that I've developed. And she will, I'm not sure how you're going to do that, Caitlin, but yes, I'm more than happy to share this. And of course, make it your own and change it up as you need.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and share that in the follow-up emails. And I know I'm seeing a bunch of people saying, please share all of the tools. So we'll definitely be sending an email out with all of the links that Gail has mentioned. Okay, so the next question we have is, do you find that NTL's GRPI still holds? Interpersonal is generally a symptom of something going on at the procedure, roles, or goals level.
Yes. If I understand what you're saying, yes, there's something going on that's causing those personality or interpersonal kinds of issues. And again, I'm going to refer to that Edmondson article, who really talks a lot about doing that diagnosis for those kinds of interpersonal issues. And as I said earlier, it's, if you don't kind of provide some structure around the process issues to begin with, you end up with, again, as I said, any of you who work in a university, faculty can be difficult sometimes. So one of the first things when I was head of a committee was to put some structure around the processes so that we didn't have who's the loudest voice in the room thinks that, that's going to be the way things are going to go. So yes, those are, if I'm getting the drift there, that's definitely a true statement.
Great. Okay. And then another question we got is, how do you recommend bringing this up, the idea of doing something like the TKI Team Report, for example, to your manager?
Oh, to my manager. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick move ahead here because that was one of my questions. Because like I said earlier, managing conflict with my boss. So I really love this one. I've worked on it a lot the last couple of years, and I have gotten so much good input from the people I've worked with. So I'm going to show you real quickly. This came from a real session I did. So I asked them to give me examples of conflict that they face with their boss. So these are just a sample, but these are the kinds of things that they brought up. And then I also asked, because obviously there's a power differential. One thing that's really important about the TKI and around conflict in general is power is really central to the way conflict works. And so a lot of the work I do, I'm looking at with your superior up, coworkers, subordinates, or direct reports, and then external. So all of those relationships, there's going to be some slight differences because of power differences on how conflict is managed. So here real quickly are things again from one of my classes that I said, what makes it difficult to express disagreement with your boss? So I have all of these that they came up with. So this is just examples that they came up with. And then I use the, it's kind of a riff off of managing up or managing your boss, the old Gabaro article that was updated again quite a long time ago. And I use that as kind of a core and then build the conflict management around that. So one is to kind of get clear for yourself what those challenges might be for that upward communication and the conflict you might be happening. Looking at your own and your boss's goals, strengths, weaknesses, and personality style. And then that's again where the assessments would come in. What's your conflict handling preference? What is your boss's preference? Communication styles usually tells us a lot, what kind of pressures or stress are going on. And then really what you're trying to do is maintain and develop a good relationship with your boss. Because if that's good for you, it's good for your boss and it's good for the organization. So it really depends on where you are in that. And wherever that struggle is, how you can try to decenter that, if you will, and then and start a better conversation. And unfortunately, the data show in a study that you have is 70% of managers are not very good managers. all of us have personal experience around that. So unfortunately, sometimes it requires the subordinates to lead up and actually make suggestions to the boss. And there are some ways that you can do that. Again, it depends on what the situation's like. If you have really volatile and hostile kinds of things happening, I'm not gonna, you have to approach that very carefully. Sometimes it needs outside intervention, it just really depends. But what you want to do is think of ways that can mutually support one another, suggest conflict processes that can improve that direct report process. And ideally, you're having regular meetings with your boss and talking about the way that you're working together. A good boss will instigate those kind of conversations. What I've done that's really fun is what I have in my class is students go do an interview with their boss. And that interview with the boss helps them learn all these things that most of them I find out don't know about what their boss's goals are. They talk about not necessarily strengths and weaknesses, but what kind of issues keep them up at night, what kind of issues are they dealing with their boss, the boss's boss. And it's hugely insightful. And then the students in class take the TKI along with other assessments. And then I encourage them to go back and have a conversation with their boss about what they learned. And then if it's already not open, to open up a conversation where they can start to talk about these things and really starting to see like, oh, I see now why we're having difficulties doing this. What are some other ways we might be able to work better together? And I've gotten lots and lots of great feedback. But like I said, sometimes it takes the subordinate opening up that conversation. So, and you can do it in kind of quiet, careful ways if you need to. Okay, anything else?
Yeah.
Any questions?
We got one question that I can go ahead and answer. So, do we need special certification or authorization to buy and use the TKI? So no, there is no certification program required for that. If you're planning to administer that through Elevate, you'll just need an account, but no certification program for that. And I will send out information on the TKI and the TKI Team Report as well, along with the slides and the recording. Okay, and then another one for you, Gail. How long should an intact team be together before you begin working with them on team skills?
So my answer would be, I would start at the beginning. We do, at Naval Postgraduate School, they have an onboarding program. It's not for everybody, but people who sign up. They have an onboarding program for executives. So when a new admiral comes on board a command and his executive team, they start with some visioning, thinking strategically right from the get-go. And the feedback we've gotten from that is what normally would have taken them 6 months. They are there like within a couple of weeks. So, and we would use a variety of instruments. It might be an MBTI, it might be a FIRO, it might be the TKI, so EQI, some different instruments so that they get to know themselves and that as a team, and start at the very beginning thinking about how are we going to build a high-performing team. So my answer is it's never too early. And again, if you look in the facilitator's guide, I talk about that in there, as well as there should be some things in the third webinar that talks about that. And then of course others, as I showed you in that one matrix, sometimes that doesn't happen. And even if it does happen, you still end up with struggles. So how do you intervene with a struggling team? So there's all kinds of ideas around what you can do with that. That's oftentimes where we're called in to help with that. So yeah, I think hopefully that answers the question. So I would say never too early, but oftentimes that's not possible. So so you have to do it where you can.
Okay, great. So another one, can you talk more about integrative and distributive?
Oh, okay. So real quickly, again, because we don't have a lot of time, but the distributive is along that axis of competing, compromising, and accommodating. And it basically is the concept that we have a resource. Let's say if some of you have had training or you teach negotiation, this is going to be really familiar with you. So you have a resource, and you can only split it one way. So someone wins, someone loses, or you split it down the middle. And there are many times that might be the only way. However, in good negotiations, oftentimes you want to be integrative, so you want that win-win approach. And to be able to do that, sometimes you have to add something in order to be able to give and take. The good example I'm sure you've all heard is about the orange. We have one orange, we have two people who want that one orange. And from a distributor point of view, the only thing we're going to see as a possibility is to cut that orange down the middle. Because we just see that as the one resource that we have. The integrative approach would be to, and that's another thing that we teach in the conflict things, is firm flexibility. So being firm on what your concern is, what's important to me, versus the position that you take. Instead of I want that orange, you back up and say, why do you want that orange? One person wants the orange because they want orange juice that day. The other person wants the orange because they're going to make cupcakes and want the orange zest. And so had they known the why before, they could have actually had that one orange and both people gotten 100% of what they wanted. So that's an integrative. That's a quick, simple, and I'm sure many of you have heard that example before. But there's difference between distributive, having just to cut something down the middle, and collaborative. And that's a really good teaching point. Most people don't know the difference between compromising and collaborating. And they're very different, the split down the middle versus make it bigger. And that's what I'll be doing this next week with in Africa, is looking at how can we be more collaborative with joint resources across 5 African nations. So teaching that skill set is really important too. Anything else there for me?
Okay, so I think we're wrapping up on questions. Are there any other resources you wanted to highlight before we wrapped up this webinar, Gail?
Let me just real quick to throw this out for the people who are really into team development. I'm really into this literature and really loving it, is the history of team development and high-performing team has kind of seen team conflict as stable, that it's uniform throughout all the members. That's when somebody was asking earlier about, do we just ask the team about what they think about conflict, or is it, and they think there's a contagion effect, that so you'd have an avoiding team or a collaborating team. And the current research is actually showing, no, that's not the case. That team conflict is much more dynamic than we originally realized. It's variable among members, and it's not necessarily shared by all the members. So just a real quick question. If you do ask about team conflict, not everybody on the team is going to agree that there's even any conflict going on. Individuals have different levels of tolerance for conflict, or desire for conflict, or what they're attending to. And so that also then becomes another layer of complexity, though, that I think just makes this extremely interesting, and is an important way to kind of tease out what's going on that team and what's the relationship between the people on those teams to get to that desired outcome. That's where we're headed in all of this. Looking for the processes, looking at the dynamics, and then can we get where we need to be for high performance? So we didn't cover the thing about millennials, but we'll share that in the slides that we send to you. And also about, the last one was, about bullying. That question comes up a lot. So I've got some things on that because I did a lot of work with sexual harassment and sexual assault for the Navy. And so that often came up. So I've included some of that too. So I think that's all we have time for today. It's great having everybody here. And Caitlin, do you want to wrap things up a little? Oh, let me show you to the last. So there's references, and Caitlin will send you to the podcast and 2 of the webinars and the assessments. And then I have a list of suggested readings. If there's other resources you want, you can send it through Caitlin. I'm also available on LinkedIn. So anyway, you want more information, I just never have enough information to give, so I don't want to overwhelm people though. So,
No, it's
Caitlin,
super.
over to you.
to have a list of all of the stuff included in the slides. So like we mentioned, I'll be sending out the copy of the recording and the slides in the next couple of days, as well as links to some of those other resources that are not included within the slides. But like Gail showing, there's reading, there's other information. So you can always respond to any of our emails if you are looking for something specific and can't find it. But yeah, otherwise that will wrap us up for today. So thank you so much everybody for joining us. And please let us know if there's any other questions you have after you get the recording and the slides, and we'll be happy to answer them. And thank you, Gail, so much for sharing all of that great information.
Great, thank you.
All right, bye everyone. Have a great rest of your week.